the amount of wines coming in were increasing. The amount of wines being imported were increasing, but they weren't being sold. People who run professional importation companies outside of China don't understand how someone could import 4 containers of wine that they didn't have a market for. But at that point in China, that was quite common. That was very common because, first of all, there was this huge belief in the economy that as long as you brought the stuff in, you could sell it somehow, which turned out to be wrong. Number 2, because there was so much hype about wine, people thought it was easy to sell, like dishwashers or cars, which of course is wrong. Number 3, there was a lot of wine imported for companies to do business that they weren't worried about selling because they were imported in order to gain preferential citizenship to certain EU countries or to Australia or to various countries around the world.
Welcome to Asia Wine Market, the series that takes you inside the most dynamic and fast-evolving wine markets across Asia. I'm your host, Roza, and in each episode, we'll uncover the stories, trends, and opportunities shaping the future of wine in this vibrant region. Whether you're a winery looking to expand in Asia or a wine professional exploring global trends, this series is for you. Hello and welcome to Asia Wine Market series. Today I'm very excited to record our second interview on China. For the first one, you can have a look at our show notes and follow the link. So our today's guest is Fongyee Walker, Master of Wine, one of the world's leading authorities on the Chinese wine market and the first Master of Wine based in mainland China. The co-founder of Dragon Phoenix Wine Consulting and School, which is one of China's most respected independent wine education and consulting companies. So welcome, Fongyee. We're very happy to have you here today.
Well, thank you very much for having me on this podcast. And I'm excited to get down with you about the market in China and how it's developing and going. I am as you say, I was the first Master of Wine resident in China, but luckily not the last. There have been many more after me. Well, not many more, but a few more. And it's been a wonderful journey opening Dragon Phoenix Wine Education for me and really being able to teach a new generation and the upcoming generation of Chinese consumers all about wine. It's my passion. It's also my job. I just enjoy sharing wine knowledge with all of them. And it's not just about certification. It's about pursuing how wonderful the world of wine is and allowing them to explore that.
That's true. And first, I would love you to briefly walk us through your journey in wine and what brought you to Beijing nearly 20 years ago. And what fascinated you most about China's emerging wine culture back then?
Gosh, well, it's lovely to share this story with you, and I'll try and make it short. But I came to China about 20 years ago. It was originally not to open a wine school. It was originally to work at one of the universities in China with my husband. Previously, I had been at Cambridge University, where I had helped run and captain the blind wine tasting team. The reason I was doing that is because my now husband, then boyfriend, he was the captain of the blind wine tasting team, and he persuaded me into this world of wine, and it captivated me. I'd always drunk wine, but being able to learn about it and to blind taste it really took it up a whole new level. So I got into it, and then when I was in China, even though working at a university was fulfilling, I just thought, how much more exciting would it be if we could teach people about wine? Because 20 years ago, the Chinese wine market was pretty small. So we parlayed that into a business, and it's been pretty much steady ever since. I'm really glad I made this a decision, and I'm so glad because now I have wine as part of my life every day.
That's so exciting. And also one remark for our listeners and also to you. So I'm originally from Kazakhstan, but my first steps in wine actually started in China because I was living in Beijing for some time. My first major is English and French teacher. So I was teaching English in Beijing. And then closer to my 30s, I decided to switch careers. And actually, later I found out about Dragon Phoenix once I got interested in wine because I wanted to learn it from somewhere, not just online, but from a
Mm.
school. And then I found out about Dragon Phoenix. And then I also found out about your background. And I was like, that was a big inspiration for me because it was a bit scary, to be honest, like to switch careers and to start
Yeah.
something new. And that is why you're a big inspiration for me, your story, your background as well.
You're too kind. I mean, switching careers is brave. And I think it's something that you've really got to follow your heart on. And for me, actually, the one thing I did learn when I was in academics is what I enjoy is teaching.
Hmm.
So, what I do now, even though it's a change of career, it's in wine, it's still part of my first love, which is teaching and communicating.
Hmm. That was also what I was thinking about. It's like, okay,
Mm.
so working in the wine industry, it's not only about selling wines directly, like being a salesperson or being a sommelier, but you can actually combine like teaching and wine together as well.
Exactly. And you were once a teacher, you know that the whole aim of teaching is to bring students into a new world, to open their eyes. And that's what the world of wine is about.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so for today, our key takeaways from these episodes are we're going to understand the Chinese market. So we are going to track how the Chinese wine market has transformed over these years and where true growth opportunities lie today. Second, we're going to decode the consumer mindset and also link it to the Chinese cuisine. So, we are going to learn how Chinese wine lovers actually think about wine, wine education, and we're going to talk about some food pairings as well. And third, we will try to get some actionable strategies for the Italian wine producers through storytelling and cultural understanding. So, first, I'd like to ask you, so having worked in China for almost 2 decades, how would you describe the evolution of the market from when you first arrived compared to today?
The evolution of the Chinese market has been at super high speed, like the evolution of Chinese everything. What takes 20 years to happen in the West will happen in 5 years in China. So 20 years ago, and I can even go back previous to that because I did study in China in the 1990s. I can say that, in that time, even up to 20 years ago, the world of wine was really small. Almost nobody drank wine. And the people buying wine didn't really know a lot about it. They didn't know about grape varieties, they didn't know about styles. And the world of wine was sort of limited to proving you had like face, that you had this position in society that was higher. And it was all about status. It wasn't necessarily about exploring flavors, about exploring yourself, about expressing your own personality. I think the biggest difference now is that the wine market for consumers has become much more about expressing your own personality and your lifestyle. And as a result, the wine market here has exploded from 20 years ago, where it was even very difficult to find white wines in China. It was very hard to find Italian wines in China. And suddenly now in the major cities, you can find almost every style of wine that you can think of from almost every country.
Mhm.
So there's been a huge explosion in it.
And we're happy for that. We're happy that Asian markets in general, not just China, are developing rapidly. There are already some mature markets in Asia. There are a lot of interesting emerging markets as well. But right now, despite these growth and development, there is a frequent discussion, like a few years already,
Yeah, yeah.
in Western media, especially about the slowdown in the Chinese wine market. So, from your perspective, living there, actually working in this industry there, what is really happening with the consumption?
So there's a lot to unpack in that question. And first of all, I want to address the problems that were before COVID. In that, before COVID, we were reading a lot of media reports from Western media and Chinese about how wine was exploding and how it was fastest growth. Well, it was growing from a very small point. So if you only sell one bottle a month and then you sell two bottles a month, That's a huge growth rate, but you're actually not selling much wine. But it makes very good headlines when you write about that. So there was a lot of these attention grabbing headlines because that's the nature of journalism. And they led to a very misleading picture of what was going on in China. The other problem is that the statistics from that point, the pre-COVID times, were incredibly misleading and actually quite incorrect in the picture they were giving of the market. The amount of imports were apparently exploding. The amount of domestic wine production seemed to be exploding as well. However, that really wasn't the situation. First of all, the amount of wines coming in were increasing. The amount of wines being imported were increasing, but they weren't being sold.
Mm-hmm.
And people who run professional importation companies outside of China don't understand that. They don't understand how someone could import 4 containers of wine that they didn't have a market for. But at that point in China, that was quite common. That was very common because, first of all, there was this huge, huge belief in the economy that as long as you brought the stuff in, you could sell it somehow, which turned out to be wrong. Number 2, because there was so much hype about wine, people thought it was easy to sell, like dishwashers or cars, which of course is wrong. Number 3, there was a lot of wine imported for companies to do business that they weren't worried about selling because they were imported in order to gain preferential citizenship to certain EU countries or to Australia or to various countries around the world. So that way you would get your green card quicker. Mm-hmm. So you had importation for investment in nationality and citizenship. You had importation because you just believed that all sales were going to increase. You had importation from a misunderstanding of all the hype surrounding it. So, and you also had importation from companies who were not professional wine import companies. They did not sell wine. They didn't know how to sell wine because it was just one branch of their business, and their main business was producing money so quickly. They almost didn't know how to spend it. So they would get into wine because it was sexy. So due to that, all of those pre-COVID figures vastly overestimated the amount of wine being sold in China. I'm not saying imported, I'm saying actually being sold, because domestic production was also being miscounted as well. So there was an overestimation of domestic. So it wasn't as much as we thought. That wasn't even being sold through. We had a huge amount of imported wine, which wasn't being sold through. And then what we had in COVID times was a complete rebalancing of the market. There is still unsold wine from before 2020 in China. But what's happened is after 2020, after COVID, things became much more professionalized in the Chinese world. In other words, companies suddenly didn't have that much money to waste playing around with the wine market. Companies that were importing large amounts of wine without a target consumer, they were going bankrupt because they had far too much money tied up in stocks, but they had no way of developing the market. So what we had there was a rationalization, and a much needed rationalization. And actually, I would say that the wine market actually hasn't shrunk in the last 2 years. The amount of wine that people are buying and consuming, which we cannot get statistics for, to my impression and talking to people who are doing well in the wine industry and people who are not doing so well, the overall impression is that wine is being drunk more in China. It's being drunk more regularly. It's being drunk by more people. It's just that we had such a messed up situation before that if you look at the imports and if you look at domestic production, it's contracting. But the amount of wine actually being consumed, that's another question. So my opinion is that the wine importation market contracted, but it contracted due to very good reasons that will create a much more sustainable end market for the consumption of wine in China. Mm-hmm. That was a very long answer. Sorry.
No, but that was a perfect answer, to be honest. Like some of the things I didn't even think about, to be honest. But I understood about the imported wines, but what about the domestic wines, like the figures of domestic wines produced and sold?
Yeah, the domestic figures were out coming from quite a few reasons. Number one reason, when the OIV started to collect statistics in China, they were collecting statistics for vineyard area, but they didn't have any real connection to end use of the grapes. Now, China has a very big vineyard area, and when they looked at the increase in vineyard area in China, they thought it was due to wine, and it wasn't. The increase in vineyard land, vineyard area, was due to the diversification of agricultural business, especially the investment in producing fresh fruit. Now, as you know, fruit in China is a luxury gift item, right? You've seen bunches of
Yeah,
grapes for like,
yeah.
15 euros for half a kilogram. So it's a very aspirational product, which means you can make a lot of money out of it as a farmer. So as the economy grew, the market for luxury gifting fruit grew, which meant that the area for planting very high value fresh grapes actually grew. Things like the Jufeng. I can't remember the English name for it, but it's a very, very pretty large grape that's very big and very attractive. And these kind of grapes, they can sell well on the fruit market, which is a much more important market in Asia than it is in the West. Nobody in the West thinks about giving big gift packets of very expensive peaches to their friends. But in China, in Asia, that's a very accepted gift. So that's the first reason. So vineyard area was expanding, and the OIV were kind of thinking, oh, this is linked to wine production. Well, actually, it's only about 10% of vineyard area in China is used for wine grapes. That's small. That brings our total area smaller to like smaller than Bordeaux in total area. Now, the other trouble is when we look at those wine grapes, yes, they were producing wine, but the statistics for wine production also got into a problem coming from two sources. First of all, a lot of companies made bulk wine in Xinjiang and then sent the wine by tanker to the eastern seaport where they could bottle it much closer to the markets. And that wine was being counted twice.
Oh, was there a specific reason for that?
Because the statistics for wine production are gathered by provincial. So they would count the amount of wine being produced in the winery. Now the winery includes a bottling line. So if you take bulk wine from another area of China, put it into a bottling line in another area of China and bottle it there, it gets counted twice. It's total production of wine.
Hmm.
The other thing is that it also failed to realize that many of the wines being bottled as so-called Chinese wine, especially on the eastern seaboard, Tianjin, Shandong, they were actually imported wine, bulk wine, being mixed with some Chinese wine and being bottled there. So that was also being counted as Chinese wine production, which meant that when you took the double counting, the overcounting, the overestimation of vineyard area for making wine, it meant that the production amount was completely incorrect. Which is why, if you look at the figures for the last 5 years, when the OIV actually started to do proper research on the situation of China, China suddenly went from being like the fifth biggest producer to like the 15th in 1 year.
Now I got it.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. But is it legal even? Like, if you bring imported wines, then you bottle them in China as Chinese wine.
But they don't get labeled as anything
Oh,
because there is no system of geographical indication yet in China that
hmm.
is firmly fixed, right? There are a few regions that now have government recognition of their area, but there's no recognition of wine of China. We're not part of the EU. We're not part of those regulations. So if you want to bottle a wine in China and the wine comes from somewhere else, you just either don't put that information, you just leave it out, or you just do a sort of wine label that doesn't tell you anything really.
Hmm. So it's still legal to do that,
Yeah,
being
yes,
alcohol drink.
kind of legal.
Okay, that's very interesting.
Yes, it's sort of legal. I mean, technically, it's a gray area, shall we say,
Hmm.
open to creative interpretation. Now, they are in the last few years getting much stricter about that. But I'm talking about is pre-COVID, where and it was the Wild West. Yeah.
I think that's a whole another episode on that, to
Oh
be
yeah.
honest.
Yeah.
But that was all very interesting. Thank you so much. But now let's shift from that to some areas where we sell wines. So, which regions or cities currently offer the best opportunities for imported wines? We know that cities like Shanghai or like Guangzhou, Shenzhen, they were quite good with selling wines. Beijing, back when I was there, it was like less, much less. And what about these cities, but also second and third tier cities? How are they developing now?
Yeah, it's a little bit difficult to say what's developing for certain, but what we do see is that it's more adaptation of people drinking wine on a more regular basis, definitely in smaller cities than the tier one and even the tier two. It is gradually spreading. However, looking at scientific proof, there's very little. But what I certainly do hear is that more and more wine importers and wine companies are managing to sell more wines into the smaller cities. For instance, there's some cities on the eastern seaboard where the selling of wine has really increased. I would say Fujian province is one of those, the cities like Xiamen and Fujian. These are really, really quite developing. The whole area outside of Shanghai, Shanghai is sort of influencing its surrounded cities. So I would say Suzhou has a very lively wine culture for a Chinese city, and Hangzhou is increasing ever more. So it's quite interesting to see how they spread out. As you say, I think one of the worst areas is actually Beijing and the northeast of China. People there don't seem to be embracing like wine culture as much as other places, which is funny because they do drink an awful lot. So but I think for me, the real potential is those eastern seaboard cities, which they are very much more developed in terms of economy, and also they have a slightly more relaxed lifestyle. So that might also help people rather than the really hardworking, fast-paced lifestyle of like Beijing or even Shanghai, which is the best wine market in China. Compare Shanghai compared to Suzhou. Suzhou people will have more time and more ability. It's like Chengdu is also a good market just because people value lifestyle there.
Hmm. And about the people who are actually drinking wine there. So, who are today's Chinese wine consumers? Their knowledge definitely has changed, but what about the taste and also the expectations about what they want to see in the bottle changed or not?
Okay. So the new wave of Chinese wine consumers are very, very different. I mean, this is China. You have to change your mindset towards this market every 5 years, or you're going to be left behind. So I would say, first of all, the traditional Chinese wine consumer didn't know about taste. They weren't particularly drinking wine because they liked the taste. They were drinking wine as an expression of their status, an expression of where they were. But now the new wine consumer is much more self confident about their own tastes. Accordingly, there's been a much bigger shift towards white wine. White wine is really popular. Wines that are a little bit sweet, but not really luscious or heavy. You can see a lot of people drinking Asti style wines, things like that. You see a lot of people going into sort of off dry or medium dry German Rieslings. They're going much more into a lighter style of wine, which, after all, is much closer to a beginner wine palette or it's just much more easy to understand a wine that has a little bit of sugar.
Hmm.
So that's one thing. Also, in conjunction with drinking for everyday pleasure rather than drinking for status, the price of the wines they're seeking is also going down. And there's been a huge driver for that in China with the uptake of grocery chains like Fresh Hippo, Hema, which are
Hmm.
now offering tons of wine for under 100 renminbi. Or Sam's Club. I mean, Sam's Club has gone from like zero, not existing in China, to being a huge retailer of wines. And the wines are, even I buy wines from Sam's Club. Like, it's such good value for money. So we see that changes in average price per bottle, definitely kind of going down. 100 renminbi seems to be a very big pinch point. And then we also see drinking for status kind of going down as well, and people more drinking for everyday pleasure.
But that's also interesting. Again, the last time I was in China was 2022. Well,
Mm,
before I moved here. So, and I was always like buying things from Hema and Sam's Club, but I never bought wine there, I
yeah.
think, back then. That's an interesting change.
They've really done well to capture it. And now the other more traditional online retailers like Jingdong, they are
Hmm.
really struggling almost to push themselves forward again because they've lost a lot of ground in wine sales to people like Sam's Club, Aldi, people like that.
Hmm. Also, I remember on Ding Dong, if I remember the prices back then correctly, they were also not cheap.
Yeah,
Like you
yeah,
would think twice
exactly.
before buying things on Ding Dong, even though it's online. Like you expect buying things online, like they should come a bit cheaper, but when it came to wine, like it wasn't on Ding Dong.
And that's why when Sam's Club started in, and Sam's Club now is in several large cities in China, it is kind of almost slaughtering the competition.
Hmm.
You know, your pick people. One of the best sellers, for instance, is a South African Chenin Blanc, and it's about 68 renminbi, I think, or even cheaper, maybe. Maybe it's 49. And people are buying that in huge volumes. And
Hmm.
people are saying in the comments, oh, it's just so relaxing and it's not
Hmm.
serious. And that's what people are looking for because everyone's income buying power has gone down a bit, but everyone's also wanting to have more of a break from everyday life concerns. So it's very much more focused towards affordable lifestyle.
Okay. So, with all these changes, looking ahead 5 to 10 years, or like 5 years, let's say, what major trends do you believe will define the market?
Oh, God knows you cannot do a 5-year business plan for China. You could do a 5-year business plan for China, but you might as well throw it away. It's absolutely useless. Uh, I mean, let me say my hope. My hope is that it will develop like very much new wine markets around the world. I am old, and I remember when the American market began to develop with Margarita's Pinot Grigio and stuff like that. I remember, being Canadian when my dad was one of the only people who drank wine among his friends. And I think if I feel in my heart how I want it to develop, I want it to develop like that. So it's had a weird beginning because Chinese wine market began in this very artificial state of people buying nothing but like 1982 Lafite and drinking these hugely expensive wines and actually not enjoying them very much. And now there's been a huge turn to actually, hey, look, if we buy cheaper and like less complex wines, they're actually more fun to drink. And then I hope it will develop to, okay, well, we've had the cheaper wines and they're fun. And some of us will always drink that because we can't afford anything better. But the ones who afford something better will go, oh, just wait, there's a lot more diversity. There's a lot more interesting stuff out there that might be a little bit more expensive, but I want to explore it. So certainly, for instance, the number of people taking level 2 with us has not dropped out. We've got an awful lot of that entry level wine consumers. They're not wine lovers, entry level
Hmm.
wine consumers who really want to explore more about wine. So I think that's a good sign for the future wine market.
That's very promising. And I also think this is a good segue for us to focus on the wine education and your school in particular. That was part 1 of our conversation with Fongyee Walker, Master of Wine. Stay tuned for part 2 coming in the next couple of weeks. Thanks for joining us on Asia Wine Market. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and share this episode with your fellow wine professionals wherever you get your pods. To stay updated on upcoming wine events, market insights, visit ItalianWinePodcast.com. Catch you in the next episode. And until then, cheers from Asia.